record and we'll capture this for the students at home. We've got plenty to do. Now listen, we've got assignments coming in really steady. It's great. You notice once I start grading an assignment, I put M's in to everybody else that hasn't done it as missing. Okay, so I think it's important to kind of catch up. If you haven't done the first one yet, it's time to get that done because you can wait too long. You get down there and there's just too many to do. I got 10 to do. That's hard. If you kind of keep up, it's a lot easier. But you have other classes too, so you have to kind of prioritize, schedule, kind of make your own decisions there as to when work's done. I did notice that one student missed this itch. Okay, this right here where the doldrums is. Remember this, that intertropical convergence zone where the currents and the winds from the northern southern hemisphere collide and create, a dead zone essentially. Creates lots of clouds. You can kind of see the band here, but the wind just dies. And of course, that's what Columbus ran into when he was on his way to the Americas on that first voyage. So one student missed that last time I graded. I just thought I'd mention that really fast so they could go back and fix it. And remember, if you make a mistake, no biggie. You make a mistake, you simply can go back in and fix the part that you didn't get 100% on. The goal here is that everybody can get an A. You just got to do the work. And if you do the work and you're accurate in your answers, then you'll be fine. Okay. All right. Most people who've kept up have A's, right? So that's good. And if you do the guides you haven't done yet, where you have M's for missing, if you get those done, your grade will just pop up just really fast. Okay. All right. Well, let's pick up the story. And I will kind of, for some classes, be repeating a little bit when we talked about the voyages of discovery, the voyages of Columbus. And we talked about how Columbus had, 4 voyages that he took. And let's just talk about the implications now of that. Okay, the implications is that the modern world was created by a convergence of certain factors. And one of the very most essential and important is the development of the trading systems that we have today that keep food on our tables. We saw this at the beginning of the COVID crisis where we ran out of toilet paper. How is that possible? Well, it's because it's a worldwide system that creates that. And so as a result, you have to keep those lines open for things like that. These are basic necessities, if you will. So, I mean, it's like, strawberries we're eating this time of year coming from Chile, fish that we eat sometimes that you can buy at the store, right, might come from the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's like this worldwide interconnected network of trade that didn't exist until the modern world. It was literally created. And so our whole lifestyle is based upon that. Imagine if we had to make everything we used and ate right here in Utah County. That wouldn't be very good because we don't have the natural resources to create most of the things. I mean, it'd be tough enough just to create enough electricity, for example. We certainly couldn't create iPhones. We couldn't create any of the technologies we use. We are dependent on worldwide trade, started by these guys, Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. Now, when Columbus spots this first island, right, they named it San Salvador. Now, remember, they were coming from a very Catholic country during the medieval period. And they were in part there to expand Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church. Where this island was, nobody's sure exactly. We know approximately where it was. National Geographic thinks it's Samana Key, right here, this one. Now listen, this is interesting. This is the Bahama chain above Cuba here. There's a lot of directions Columbus could have gone. Remember, he wouldn't have known anything was out here at all. For all he knew, this was an outer island of Japan. In fact, that's kind of what he guessed. He was wrong, of course, by a lot. But he also could have followed the currents northward. That would have been easy and ended up in West Palm Beach or Orlando. And, he could have gone straight to Disneyland that afternoon, but he didn't. Instead, he decided to sail southward. And as he comes by, he sees a bunch of other little islands. He just gets along the coast of this part of Cuba and then goes to this next island, which is called Hispaniola. And Hispaniola is about 1/3 the size of all of Spain. So all of a sudden, this island is like, man, it's like, we're adding 1/3 to the size of our own country here. This is huge, right? They didn't know that Cuba was even bigger. And they had no idea that Florida was even up there. And so this is kind of an interesting time. You have to understand that this was nothing but unexplored ocean. Nobody knew anything about. And so that first island that they came to was Hispaniola. Today it's two countries, Haiti on one side, French speaking, and Dominican Republic on the other, which is Spanish speaking. All right. So Columbus comes in and they're exploring this northern coast, and then he crashes his ship into the shore. It probably hit a reef or something. He just crashed it. So the biggest ship of the three little ships, they weren't very big, any of them, but he crashes the biggest one in the coastline, and they have to leave 39 men behind. They can't take them with them. There's not enough room. Now, they built a little stockade, a little fort, which they called La Navidad, because he crashes this ship on Christmas. You know, Feliz Navidad, guys. You get to stay. Hey, we'll come back for you later. They never did. They were all dead before they ever got back to return to them. But they didn't find enough room, though, for 7 kidnapped natives, which they were going to take back to Spain for show and tell purposes. That was interesting. You don't have room for, you know, some of your own guys, but you can bring a bunch of slaves in order to, you know, show that you've been somewhere. Whatever. That was important to know. Columbus returns on the Nina. So he takes control of that one ship and he sails it back. Now, with Columbus, if you look at here, this is the voyage, right? And so the 3 ships set sail and they get down here, and then he comes back. And when he's coming back, he's going to stop at a set of islands called the Canary Islands. Here you guys see the Canaries right there. The Canaries are well known. They were well out in the ocean. This myth that people keep perpetuating, that somehow Columbus and the people in Columbus's time didn't know the world was round, is of course fiction. They all knew it was round. Every sailor knew it was round. You can actually see the curvature of the earth if you're out in the ocean. You can actually see it. Also too, you could just watch the ships go off in the horizon, and of course the bottom of the ship disappears first. So that's a curve. I mean, yeah, they'd known the world was round since Greek times, maybe even before that. So point is that they had already discovered islands well out in the Atlantic that were way outside of the distance, visible distance from Spain. And the Canaries were some of them. And he comes in back to the Canaries first, and they're reprovisioning the ship. The ship had a lot of issues. It was not really seaworthy by that point. So they were fixing that. But there were lots of ships coming and going from the Canaries, some to Portugal, some to Spain. And so the trade was already vigorous to those little islands off the coast of Africa. While there, he writes a letter. And the letter was like a public relations announcement. We do it today. Companies launch some new product, they do a public relations announcement. He did the same thing, addressed, of course, to the king and queen, but to the court of Spain. And basically, he lies. The reason I'm showing this is really important. So pay attention, right? This is the important bit. This is an example of what we call a primary source document in history. When you do history, the reason we can't do history until we have writing is because you need primary sources. You need actual written words of what people were saying in order to fill out the history. Now, you can add to history some archaeological evidence, some pottery and things like that to tell the story a little better. But until you have a written record, you can't really tell history. And this he wrote with his own hand. Now, here it is translated, of course, but it's him expressing a message of discovery. Well, let's go through and read it. But understand, all primary source documents aren't necessarily true. It's just what the person actually said. And you have to look at all this evidence and string it together and see, what about what they said is true? What isn't true? Are there other people talking at the same time, or other archaeological evidence that proves or disproves this document? That's the trouble with history. So when we talk about history and writing history and creating history, it's trying to get as accurate a picture of what really happened as we can, given the fact that we know that half of our primary sources are exaggerated. I'll give you a good example of this. Each and every one of you probably has some sort of online presence or whatever. Do you put the worst pictures of yourself up there? Of course you don't. You edit those. Any embarrassing moment doesn't get onto YouTube. You edit that out. You tell the story you want told. But that's not necessarily everything. And so sometimes what gets left out is as important as what gets put in. In other words, history is tricky. To get good history is hard, maybe even impossible, but you do the best you can. And primary source documents is where you start. Now we have another kind of document called a secondary source, where somebody tells you about it and you write down what they told you. That's secondhand. Secondary source. Those are also very valuable. For example, I have a father that served in World War II and was at the Battle of the Bulge, and he never talked much about it, but he talked to other people who told me about it. So that would be a secondary source. Now, again, I'm pausing here because this is the first primary source document that we're going to share with you of any significance. And this is Columbus writing back from the Canary Islands on a ship preceding his arrival. So he gets a hero's welcome when he gets to Spain. Anyway, here's what he said. Hispaniola. He's talking about the island he discovered, that big island, right? Hispaniola, it's called. Now, España is the word for Spain. So you see how they're kind of, this is Spain's territory, right? Española. Española is a marvel. It truly is. I have friends from Dominican Republic, and oh, wow. They talk about it being so awesome. I mean, it's like, great golf and great beaches and great food and just great people. But anyway, Española is a marvel. There's no question about it. Its hills and mountains, fine plains, and open country are rich and fertile for planting and for pasturage and for the building of towns and villages. And that is 100% true from all the friends of mine that have been there. It's a lovely place. Now, here's the thing. There are many spices and vast mines of gold and other metals in this island. No, there are not. Later, they would discover some mines and things like that. But when he got there were no vast mines of gold. There weren't any mines of gold at all. He's making it up. Many spices, maybe some peppers and things and a few things. They ground up whatever they could find and took them with them. And we know, the modern hot chili peppers and all that kind of stuff come from the Americas. Maybe that's what he's referring to there. But other metals like bronze and copper and iron, you guys know all about the Iron Age. They did wear some jewelry, some of them, that they probably traded for from the mainland. So they might have been wearing some gold trinkets and things, but they would have traded for those, right? They may have found some gold, the natives, in the rivers, and maybe were able to process that. But this is just an out and out lie. Now look at this. You know what you read on prehistory.
I have one question. Do you have time for a question?
Don't have a lot of time, but sure.
You said they traded from the mainland. Would that be Cuba or like the U.S.?
Yeah, I didn't hear the question. So
were they trading from the mainland? Is the mainland Cuba or like the United States?
Oh, that's a great question. No, it would have been Mexico. They would have traded with Mexico and Cuba too, probably, but Mexico was where the civilization was. That's where civilization was in Mexico. So that's where the trade would have gone to. Yeah, good question. I like that. Now, the United States was very primitive. There wouldn't have been anything coming from the United States to speak of. I know they might have traded a few things back and forth between tribes, but the center of civilization was in and around Mexico City today, and that's where the Aztecs were. Does that make sense? And those guys did have gold, and they had vast mines of gold, but that was in Mexico. And Columbus would have had no idea that Mexico or the Americas, the continents even existed. The only thing he knew was this island and a few other islands that he spotted. Love that question. That was a good one. Okay, well, let's keep going. Okay, there are many spices and vast mines of gold and other metals in this island. They have no iron, nor steel, nor weapons, wait a minute, they're not to the Iron Age yet? But you're talking about vast mines of gold? How are they getting that gold out of that vast mine? Especially when you read the next sentence, nor weapons. They don't have weapons? They'd have some weapons. Certainly they had bows, right? Any nomadic group or any tribe living on an island would have had bows and spears. I mean, come on, Stone Age at least. Nor are they fit for them, because although they are well-made men of commanding stature and appear extraordinarily timid, you'd be a little shy too if you had these conquistadores, capturing you. The only arms they have are sticks of cane with a sharpened stick at the end, and they're afraid to use these. what they were talking about is probably their fishing spears. But the point is that this is a fabrication. And why? Because he wanted to get another voyage, and he wanted to get the money and the power to return. So he's making it up. Also, if you look carefully at this, what he's saying about the natives is these are not the Moors that they have fought for 750 years. This is not the Muslims that they've kicked out of Andalusia. These people are unprotected and are vulnerable, and they're going to be an easy conquest. Easy pickings, wealth to be had easily. You've heard stories about America, the streets are lined with gold. Well, those stories go right back to anybody that wants to fool somebody into thinking that they should come to the Americas. It's a con job. And it worked. He got 17 ships to return with. When they went back to La Navidad, they were all been killed off. They didn't stay on the northern end of the island. They went to the southern end of the island instead, where it's more protected from hurricanes. And they created the oldest city in the Americas now, called Santo Domingo. Now, when I say oldest city, that means oldest European city. Okay, because we had a big city in Mexico City already going on under the Aztecs. Now, the problem with the people that came with Columbus on that second voyage is he had told them it was going to be easy pickings. You're going to have gold that you can't imagine. The natives are easily subdued, which is true. They were easily subdued on this island, mainly because they brought disease with them, and half the islanders would die of disease. They tried to enslave the natives on the island, turn them into slaves to do their work for them. But they made terrible slaves. First of all, they knew where to run and hide. They would escape easy. And then also, too, they weren't used to the treatment and the food. And as a result, they tended to die in captivity very quickly, too. So they made terrible slaves. So these unhappy campers are now writing letters back home. And who are these unhappy campers that jumped on these 17 ships to come to Hispaniola? They were the second and third sons of medieval nobility that had no inheritance rights. This gets a little tricky, so follow along here. In Spain, when they kicked the Moors out, powerful warlords took over entire valleys, entire areas, and made them their own. And they gave themselves titles of nobility, like Lord, Duke, Duchess, that kind of thing. Barons, we call them, the barons in English history. So what they would do then is everybody that lived in that area worked for them. They were serfs, they were peasants, whatever. So they owned all the land, and everybody on that land worked for them. They had to follow their rules. They were the lords, literally, of their estates. In America, you can equate it to plantations. So you have these big southern plantations later in history, right? We had all these slaves working, and the owner owned all this land. Well, that's the society they came from. But by law in Spain, you could not divide up a big estate. Think about it for a second. In our culture, if, parents pass away and they have 3 kids, the wealth is distributed among the three families, right? That's kind of the way we do things. That would have been true in hunting gathering societies too. If there's 100 sheep, she had 3 sons and the father dies, everybody gets 33 sheep. You can fight over that last one. Not with land. With land, if you divide the land up, it becomes unproductive. So listen very carefully. They pass laws and says you can only pass the estate on to the oldest son. So the oldest son inherited everything. The title of nobility, they owned all the land, and was totally in charge. So if you were a second, third, or fourth son, you got nothing. And you were living at the, beneficence of your older brother, who may or may not like you. So you're kind of out of luck. And so what do? Well, if you're a second or third son, George Washington, by the way, was a perfect example of this. His older brother inherited the big family plantation. He got nothing. So he started on a military career. Later, his older brother would die and he would inherit the land, but only after the death of his brother. these unhappy campers wanted to establish themselves. First, if they could go to the Americas and get really rich, bring a bunch of gold back, they could live the life of a nobleman and not have to work the rest of their lives. These noblemen too weren't workers. They always had somebody work for them. As rich noble youngsters, they would have peasants and serfs and slaves that would do their bidding. They get to the Americas and there's nobody to do the work. The Native Americans won't do it because they're either sick or they're running away. So you had to work hard, and they weren't used to that. And also too, Columbus understood they had to work, and he was a bit of a dictator, like, okay, total dictator, always telling them what they should do. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. And they resented it because they were noblemen. Nobody told them what to do. Nobody told them they had to work. Nobody told them anything. They just got here and were very disillusioned. If you were going to make it in the Americas, you had to reestablish your own land and you had to do the work, and that didn't make them happy. So they wrote all these very disgusting letters back to Spain about him. And Columbus became the most hated person in Spain. It was a pretty wild moment, frankly. And here is the island today. Here's Santo Domingo, where the major city was established. It's still a colonial city. It's beautiful. It's really cool. I've only seen pictures. But here's the island. And again, there's the split between the French side, and that's an interesting story, how the French got control of that, and the Spanish side here on this other side right here. Now there's a big, of course, statue of Columbus there in the middle of that. But when Columbus goes back to Spain, he is greeted by nobody. He has become the least popular person there. He's a complete failure. What you have to understand is that Vasco da Gama has now arrived in India. He had succeeded where Columbus had failed. He was the hero of the day. He was Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. Everybody else was like, And with the thing that happened for Columbus that gave him, he was a great navigator. And he said, no, I'm going to find Japan. I'm going to find China. I can do this. We just found this island on the way and we're going to get there. So he was convincing enough to get 6 more ships and go on a 3rd voyage. On this voyage, he did discover South America and Central America. He got to what we call Panama. He wanted to cross over the isthmus because he heard rumors that there was another big ocean on the other side, which would have worked, by the way. If they could have established, which they eventually would, establish a city on the isthmus on one side and then just hiked over the other, built more ships and kept going, they could have got to China that way. Eventually they would. The Spanish would trade from Cuba all the way to the Philippines to China and back again later in history. But his crew mutinied. They were in complete revolt. They were done with him, and they slapped him in chains and took him back to Spain in chains. He was considered persona non grata. They finally did give him one more trip on a leaky vessel that was not seaworthy, one ship, and he marooned that. He crashed it on the island of Jamaica, which is just below Cuba. This was an interesting kind of thing because when he's on this island, the natives at first were helping him and whatever, but then after they got fed up with him, and then we're going to kill them all. So Columbus then made a big show of that there's going to be an eclipse. And because he understood astronomy and he understood, navigation, and he understood everything like that, he accurately predicted the eclipse that was going to happen. That scared the natives enough that they then started to cooperate again in helping them and avoided them from being killed. So this is why I'm telling you, and I want you to listen to me very carefully. I need everybody paying attention right now. Take your astronomy class seriously. You never know when knowledge of eclipses may save your life. Right now, I just learned Mercury is visible. It's the one planet I haven't seen of the visible planets I haven't seen yet this summer, and it's now visible. So I can't wait. Take that astronomy class and have a good time with it. It's your most important class. Raise your hand if you have astronomy. Okay, you guys that just raised your hand, that's your most important class because that goes on your college grade. So take that one really seriously. Make sure that's the one you get the A in for sure, okay? But in this case, he paid attention to his astronomy class and he was able to predict, and it saved their lives. So a couple members of his crew, one in particular, gets with native oarsmen on a canoe. They got some of the native canoes. And he actually paddles to Cuba, which you can imagine paddling to Cuba on a canoe, and then all the way to Hispaniola, finally gets to Hispaniola and says, Columbus is marooned. He tells the governor of Hispaniola that Columbus has been marooned on this island. The governor doesn't want to do anything about it. He hates Columbus. Finally, he does send a rescue mission. Columbus then finds his way back in 1504 to Spain, and he dies there 2 years later. His bones were placed in this box right here and put in a church. Now, the people in Dominican Republic down here say that they have the bones, that the bones were brought here and now are buried here, behind this monument in this building you see there. Probably not true. They did a DNA thing, and they think this is Columbus in this little box here in Spain, in Sevilla, Spain. But now, here's the deal. Columbus had discovered America. Do you realize America shouldn't be called America at all? It should be called Colombia. We should be the United States of Colombia. If there's any fairness in the world, why did it get called America? Well, because they despised Columbus so much. There was a Portuguese sailor by the name of Amerigo Vespucci. America's got it. This guy was part of that. You know how they would go out further in, and they discovered this little tip here, thought it was an island to begin with, and they established a little colony there. So when they were going to India, they could stop here, get fresh food, and catch the winds and whip around the coast there. Remember that? Well, one of their sailors, he was actually a note taker. I don't think he was even a captain. Anyway, he does 8 voyages. They decided, hey, how much is over here? And so they started to explore that coast too. And after he gets down a ways, he realizes this is not an island. This is a lot bigger. This goes as far south as Africa. And it was the first understanding that these were continents that were in the way, that they had found literally a new world. And this is, of course, a question from your last study guide. Mundos Novos, new world. Literally, it's like going to Mars and discovering a civilization. It's that big a deal. It's like getting in a spaceship, going to Alpha Centauri and finding a new planet with new people on it. It was that big a deal. They had no idea that these continents were even there. What the people were like, they had no idea at all about what was there. Now, like all great sailors that were trained, he knew latitude and longitude, and they mapped the coast. And the coordinates were given to map makers back in Europe when they returned. And one of these map makers was actually, I think, living in Spain at the time, but he was German, and his name is Martin Waldseemüller. And Martin Waldseemüller, you kind of look at this map. This is an early map showing some semblance that there are continents out here. Now, there's a lot of guesswork here, but they did manage to get part of this coastline right. And he writes across it, Mundos Novos, the new world. And he labeled this part Americas, that it was Amerigo Vespucci that gave him the data to show you what that coastline looked like. And the name stuck. And in the Spanish court, with Columbus sitting there watching, they voted to name it America instead of Colombia, as an in-your-face Columbus, you suck, we hate your guts. And he died in disgrace. It would take 100 years before we would re-acknowledge the importance of the voyage of Columbus. Today, we celebrate Columbus Day in the Americas. Columbus Day is a national holiday. But for the first 100 years following his death, they would have spit on his grave. What a story, huh? But he started something really important. Okay, so Mundos Novos, knowing latitude and longitude, understanding the minutes and seconds, and understanding, the 360 and 80, 180 and 90 degrees and all of that, and getting all of that right. Can you see, by the way, the latitude and longitudes here kind of on this map? Notice they're doing these little grids. You can kind of see faintly on this old map. And by the way, they're just guessing what this is too, based on Italians that traveled out here, what China was like and all of that. The only thing they've got anything right is right here in the Mediterranean and in the European coastline. Africa's pretty sharp and pretty accurate, fairly accurate until you get down to here. Then it kind of falls apart. India, they have no idea. So this is early yet. This is 1507. But these three remarkable ships, one looks like a caravel, but these three remarkable ships changed everything. These are the 4 voyages. From Columbus's primary source records, we know pretty much where he was day to day to day on each of those voyages. This is the last voyage right here, or the 3rd voyage where he discovered the coastline, but he didn't understand how big it was. To him, it was just another big island. They pretty much basically explored the Caribbean. Beautiful place, but they missed kind of the point of like North and South America altogether. However, what you should know is these islands right here are really good for growing certain crops. And one of them would be the most important, and it was sugar. Sugar is going to revolutionize Europe. It's coca actually comes from the Americas too. And you put coca together with sugar and you get chocolate. You get modern baking because of the sugar, and the money made from sugar here and other products too, like tobacco and cotton and coffee and all that things. The money made was horrendously big and would fuel the economy of Europe. So that becomes kind of important there. But as far as the voyages of Columbus were concerned, they were total failures in the eyes of the people at the time. And the Queen, who had allowed this voyage to happen in the first place, was asked after the failure of Columbus, was it worth it? I mean, you can imagine she's doing a press conference, the press corps sitting there going, well, Madam Queen, do you really think this was worth all the time and expense and money that we spent to find a bunch of islands out there that just, are a bunch of worthless little islands? She answered this way. She said, although there would be nothing but stones, I would continue there while there may be souls to save, because the thing you don't understand about Queen Isabella, it was not about the money. It was not about the power. It was about conversion to the Roman Catholic Church. Her nickname is Queen Isabella la Católica, Isabel the Catholic. Her goal was to take the Roman Catholic faith to China, but they didn't get there. They got to the Americas instead. And her efforts single-handedly keep the Roman Catholic Church as the largest church in the world still at this moment today. You look at this, it's a little bit old, this map. This is about 10 years old, so it's more now. But you look at Latin America, from the Mexican border all the way to the Tierra del Fuego, there's about 500 million Catholics, which is about 41%. It's probably closer to 45% today. In Europe, there's where it started, there's only 277 million, or 23%. Africa, it's up to 175 million, about 15%. Asia, you got another 137 million Roman Catholics. But here's important. In North America, right, there's another 85 million. So hang on one second.
They'll probably tell you when you get.
We have our car in the shop and they're trying to get hold of us. But you combine South America and Central America with North America, you have half the Catholics in the world. She saved the Roman Catholic Church and made the United States, right now, I think we're the 4th largest Catholic country in the world. And our president today, our current president of the United States, is Roman Catholic. He descends from Roman Catholics that came from Ireland. So the United States, it will be the biggest church in the United States in probably another 10 or 15 years. Right now, it's a Protestant group of Baptists. But that's all changing. And you're right here. So she accomplished her goal. She extended her religion to the 4 corners of the world. And by the time Spain is done, it has colonized the Americas and has found ways to make tons of money. Now, I want you to look at this right here. Here's the Viceroyalty of Brazil. This area right here was what was claimed by Portugal. All the rest was claimed by Spain, because we didn't have the French in here yet. We don't have the British in here yet. All of this becomes the Viceroyalty of New Spain, the Viceroyalty of Granada, the Viceroyalty of Rio de Plata. That's a river down here in Argentina. And it was all managed out of this island called Cuba. They would move from Hispaniola to Cuba a little later, and then from Cuba launch attacks on Mexico City. And this group of people, called the Aztecs, had gold in abundance. And there were also vast mines of silver. There were also huge silver mines here in Peru. And by the time the Spanish got done finding all that silver, they had become the world's superpower, economically, militarily, in every way. They were so wealthy, fueled by silver and gold coming from the Americas. And then, of course, they had a lot of crops like sugar and tobacco and other things that they were growing. They were making money that way too. So this now became very profitable. So this little country on the Iberian Peninsula had now become the world's first modern superpower nation. Portugal got off to an earlier start, so they would have been the leader there for a while, but everything got eclipsed by the gold and silver coming out of the Americas. Revolutionized the entire economy of the world. This is kind of fun to look at. We're going to lead to some different things looking at this map, but here's the thing you should know. Europe then will dominate the world's politics, the world's military, the world's colonization, and the world's technology for about the next 500 years. That is now changing. Now it's China. We're in the middle of that transformation from European dominance, which included the United States as colonies from Europeans, so we call the West. So this right here, Western Europe and the Americas, colonized by Western Europeans, that's the West. North and South America and Western Europe, the West. The Middle East is in here, of course. We know about the Middle East, the Muslim areas, right? But then when we get to the East, this triangle right here, you can see it coming down to Java, up through India, across to China. In that triangle is most of the people in the world. It's the largest population center. It's where most of the people are. And it's where now the biggest economies are emerging as a result of that huge population and their technological ability to adapt their societies to the modern world. So this right here area is now taking over the lead. But for the last 500 years, it's been Western Europe. And it was those voyages of Columba and Vasco da Gama that created the backwater of the world at the time. Remember, the Muslims were a much more advanced society. India was a more advanced society. China was a more advanced society. But this wealth coming from the Americas to Spain and from the trade to Portugal would change everything and would allow these guys to dominate the world for the next 500 years. Now, here's the thing. They picked up on inventions. For example, gunpowder was an invention from China, found its way into the Middle East, and was used by a group of Muslims called the Turks to destroy Constantinople and defeat this Christian kingdom. They created cannons, the first cannons. Well, the Europeans are going, hey, we can do that. Not only that, let's make smaller versions of those cannons and put them on our ships. And everywhere our ships go, nobody can stand up to us. Why were the Europeans able to dominate? They put artillery on warships, and nobody in the world at the time could stand up to those warships. It's often called gunboat diplomacy, but it's going to determine the fate of the world for the next 500 years, starting in 1492 and 1497, up until just the last 10 or 15 years. So we're now in the middle of an important phase of world history where world history is changing. But the modern world is the history of Western Europe changing the culture and society and technologies of the planet. All right, now, okay, time. Do we have time for the modern world? Let's see how much time we've got left here. We got plenty of time. Okay, so let's keep going here. Now, do you have any questions at all at this point? So you see, we've been leading to something, right? What is the modern world? Modern world is the history of Western Europe and its influence on the rest of the planet, for good or for ill, right? I mean, you can decide for yourself whether the invention of the steam engine and the use of coal and internal combustion engine and everything else, which created climate change. You can argue whether that was a good thing or not, but it started in Europe. The Industrial Revolution started in Europe. All of these things started in Europe, starting with these voyages. Okay, well, let's take some time for the modern world. Okay, let's drop back and rethink just a little bit. You remember back in Roman and Greek times, they had a pantheon. The Roman pantheon included, all these planets, which were named after Roman gods: Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, And you got Venus and Mercury. Mercury is the one I got to see. I've seen all the rest. They were beautiful this summer. Jupiter and Saturn, especially Mars, Venus. But Mercury now is the only one I haven't seen this summer. But at any rate, they basically, these planets were the basis of naming days of the week. In fact, we could call our week the planetary week. Okay, during the 1st and 2nd century, we're talking way back in Roman times, the week of 7 days was introduced into Rome from the Hellenistic Greek astrologers or astronomers from Egypt. So Rome had a different way of calculating the days of the week. But then these astronomers rather, that were learned from the Babylonians, they then came up with this idea of a planetary week of 7 days and calling that a week. I mean, why don't we have 10 days in a week? Why don't we have 12 days in a week? That's because these astronomers said, this is how many planets we got to work with, so we're going to have 7. Now, the thing is, in the Hellenistic astrology, we're talking about the group that was left after Alexander the Great. The 7 planets were, you ready? Here we go. And this is why we have 7 days of the week. You know, I mean, come on, we could have 10, we could have 14, we could have 3, you know, whatever we could decide. But in the Hellenistic astrology that the Romans adopted with the Julian calendar, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Moon. These are the ones you can view with the naked eye. And each was then given a day. Some of these names have survived. For example, Sunday in English. This is from the Latin, Dia Solis, right? Dimanche in French. Domingo in Spanish is Sunday, the day of the sun. So here we are worshiping on Sunday for Christians, and it's really the day of this God of the sun. Kind of ironic, but that's what it is. It celebrates the sun god. In different cultures, the sun god is called Ra in Egypt, Helios in Greek, Apollo in Rome. Anyway, you go on and on. In Persia, it was called Mithra. I won't go on and read all these, but in the year 321 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine, who had Rome convert to Christianity, he set the rules for the days of the week that kind of solidified and finalized this whole thing. And he called this the Venerable Day of the Sun, and should be the day of rest for Christians. Now in Spanish, you know, it was changed a little bit to Dominica, or the Lord's Day, Domingo, actually. So I kind of misspoke there a little bit earlier on. But in English, it stays as the day of the sun. Named Sunday, then day of the sun, derived from Hellenistic astrology, which said all that already. Germanic peoples now also, when they invaded Rome, would put their spin on things, right? And so, yeah, this spin came with the Dia Solis. They had Teutonic gods that were very similar to the Roman and Greek gods. So the Germans, basically, the Teutonics, the Norsemen, that kind of thing. It became Day of the Sunday, which is in German Sonntag, or Sunday, or Day of the Sun. Anyway, that's how it happened. Moon Day, Monday's easy, Day of the Moon. And I take a few seconds here to talk about Galileo. Galileo was in 1616, and he's kind of the father of modern physics and modern observable astronomy. And he did these wonderful drawings of the moon, because he had something that nobody else had. See, we can't see more planets because we don't have telescopes. We see telescopes, we find more planets. So if we'd have found more planets, we probably would have had another 5 days into the week. Can you imagine a day named after Pluto? Uranus, Neptune, you know, throw in a few of those. Okay, well, this was interesting though. He is basically drawing it as a rock. He's got a sense that this isn't a god, it's just an orbiting thing. And we would prove him right in 1968 when we landed men on the moon and they found rocks. It wasn't cheese. It wasn't anything else. There's no God living there. It's a rock. And they brought 38 pounds of moon rocks back with them to prove it. Now, Galileo, of course, was a polymath. I love that term. I want you to memorize it. A polymath is somebody who's kind of good at everything. He was an astronomer, he was a physicist, an engineer, and he's from Pisa, Italy. He's from Italy. Right, he's been called the father of observational astronomy. He's also the father of modern physics. So when you take your physics class, Yeah, if you like it, you'll love this guy. If you don't like it, you can blame him. Anyway, the father of the scientific method, kind of the first modern scientist, the father of modern science. And here he is with his little telescope there. So this is pretty cool, right? All right, well, I just mentioned Galileo because I love the drawings he did there. I think it's so cool. But let's now look at this. Now remember, that's part of the modern world too. Part of the modern world is to develop modern science. And he was one of the founders of that, along with Copernicus and along with Kepler and a bunch of others. All right, now let's talk about Tuesday. How did we get Tuesday? Tuesday is Martes in Spanish, which is Mars, and it was always the day of Mars, right? But here we have, again, the Teutonics, the Germanics who invaded Rome, and they threw their own spin at it in English and other language. The Latin name Dies Martis, or Day of Mars, is equivalent to the Greek, where they honored Eros, the god of war. The god of war in the Teutonic tradition is Tyr. And so Tyr's Day, that's it. Same god, just different naming, different tradition. Here he is. You can see this right here. This is what he would have looked like to the invading Germans at the time. Now, Wednesday is Miércoles, right? It's day of Mercury. That's why I got to see Mercury. I haven't seen Mercury. Seen everything else. Got to see Mercury. I'm going to look for it tonight if it's clear. The name Wednesday continues in Middle English, Wednesday. It still comes from this old term, Wodenstag, okay? So anyway, it's just calculated from the day of Mercury, reflecting the fact that the Germanic god Woden, or Odin, during the Roman era, was the Germanic version of Mercury. Now you guys know all about Odin because of course you watched Thor and you know that was his dad. Jupiter, Jueves in Spanish and Latin, Thursday. Jupiter is the sky father, also known as Jove. All right, so god of the sky and thunder, king of the gods in ancient Roman mythology and religion. And that's Thursdays named after Jupiter, Jueves in Latin. Okay, now here's the thing. Thursday is Thor. Thor is this same god, the god of thunder, to the Norsemen. So that's why it got this spin Thursday instead of being, named Jueves. It didn't take the Latin root. And so the Norse god known in modern English as Thor, similarly, Dutch, they have a different word for it. But anyway, it's Thunder's Day. It's literally what Thursday is. It's Thunder's Day. Thor's Day corresponds with the Latin Iovis or Jovis, day of Jupiter. Wow. Okay. Who knew? Right. So yeah. So next time you watch any of the Avengers series, you can, tie into that. Now, Frigg, that's also, you'll see that in the movie Thor, his mom, right? If you watch those movies. But anyway, this is an old association to a Germanic goddess Frigg, who is the equivalent of the Roman goddess Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. So here is Frigg. If you watch Thor, that's his mom, right? That's her, right? Odin was his dad, Thor. So they're part of a pantheon. What you see in the court there in the movie is the pantheon of gods from Asgard, which were, of course, the Norse gods, the Germanic gods. That's what makes the show so fun, because it's based on real mythology. But at any rate, so yeah, the version of Venus is this goddess here, goddess of love and beauty. Only woman that they're named after a woman. Saturday is easy. Saturday's Saturn. And Saturn is an interesting god of generation. So growing food and that, dissolution, things die, they decay. God of plenty, God of wealth, God of agriculture, God of periodic renewal and liberation. Boy, I had a lot going on. Anyway, after the Roman conquest of Greece, he was conflated with the Greek titan Kronos, which then you should know is the god of time. So Saturn is also the god of time, or Cronus. And I want you to remember Kronos because we're going to talk about chronometers next in the next lecture. But that's how we get the planetary week. So as you go through the week, you get the planetary week. All right, so let's see what day we're on. We're on the day of the moon here today. But here we've got then the 4 major European powers that would really kick this exploration and conquest into gear. Was starting with Portugal, then Spain, then England and France simultaneously. And these would be the first major four powers. Later, much later, they would be joined by Germany, a little bit by the Dutch, a lot by the Dutch, actually. The Dutch would be important, and to some extent, those from Denmark and other places. So, but the first major four European powers to go out and literally try to conquer the world were Spain, Portugal, France, England, and they really should include the Dutch here because the Dutch were really, really involved as well. So those five really, okay? And look at the areas they explored. Here they have we get the Dutch in here. It looks like we get them. Yeah, there's the Dutch right there, the Dutch Republic. And look at the areas they conquered. It's all color coded for you. So yellow is France, and you got this more reddish pink would be the English, and then the green would be Spain, and then the brown here, orangey color would be Portugal, and the Dutch would be down in here. So that's why that last slide we should have had them included. But these are the areas they just took over. This is called imperialism, where our empire grows and takes over you, and you work for us from now on. Okay, that's a great place to stop. And this is, of course, the modern world's really taking shape now because of these voyages of discovery. Cool. Have a good one, guys. We'll catch you later. We'll get this posted for the people at home and get your next study guide up there for you in a couple of days. We'll have 2 lectures and then the next study guide. So you got plenty of time to get this last one caught up.